The space station called Grand Hall stood above a calm blue planet. It was large, filled with many halls, markets, and living areas. People from many worlds lived there. Humans walked beside aliens with different shapes, colors, and patterns. The station was busy every day, and guards watched every corner to keep the peace. But today, something unusual happened in the center courtyard. A young alien girl named Mira stood alone in the middle of a wide open space. Her hands were tied in front of her. She had soft green skin and bright yellow eyes full of fear. Her small feet shook as she tried to stand tall. Mira did not look older than 15. Her clothes were simple and worn from daily work. Today she was not working. Today she was waiting for punishment. Crowds gathered around her. Some whispered, some pointed, but most stayed silent. Aliens from tall reptile clans, short-winged families, and smooth-skinned merchants stood together and watched. A large screen hovered above, showing the words, "Guilty of damage to noble property." Beside Mira stood a tall alien noble named Varos. His clothes were lined with gold and bright crystals. His face was cold. Beside him stood 2 guards holding long electro-whips. The weapons hummed with bright light. The guards' armor shined like polished steel. They looked ready. Mira's voice shook as she tried to speak. She said she did not mean to break the noble's drone. She said she tripped and fell. She said she was sorry. But Varos did not accept her apology. He said noble property could not be treated like trash. He said rules must be followed. He said 300 lashes would teach respect. 300 lashes could break bone. Many in the crowd knew it. Some looked away. Others watched with cold eyes. No one spoke for her. A loud horn echoed across the courtyard. A soldier patrol entered through the main gate. They wore human armor with blue emblems on the shoulders. At the front walked a human soldier named Mark. He had short hair, calm brown eyes, and a strong, quiet face. He came to the center with his patrol for a normal check. But when he saw the scene, he stopped. Mark saw Mira shaking. He saw her crying quietly. He saw the crowd watching without emotion. His eyes narrowed. He walked closer and asked the nearest alien what the girl had done. The alien merchant answered in a low voice. He told Mark that a noble drone was flying through the market yesterday. The girl tripped on a broken tile, falling into the drone. It crashed and broke. Varos demanded punishment. The council allowed it because noble property must not be harmed. Mark shook his head. He knew accidents happen. He asked why the council did not order simple payment or work hours. The merchant's shoulders dropped. He whispered that the noble had influence. The horn sounded again. The announcer spoke from a booth above the crowd. His voice echoed loudly. He said the punishment was approved. He reminded everyone that no one may step forward once the lashes begin. He told the guards to prepare. Mark felt anger rise inside. He saw the noble smile slightly. He saw Mira close her eyes and breathe fast. The guards lifted their glowing whips and checked the power levels. The crowd stepped back. The courtyard felt colder. Mira looked left and right as if searching for someone to save her. No one moved. Her knees shook again. Tears fell down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but her voice vanished. She felt alone. Mark's patrol stood behind him. His friend, a human soldier named Dan, whispered that Mark should not get involved. Dan said noble matters do not concern human patrols. He warned that nobles have political power. He said humans could cause trouble by interfering. Mark did not respond at first. His eyes stayed on Mira. He remembered the first time he came to this station. Many aliens feared humans back then. Many believed humans were violent or cold. Mark worked many years to show kindness, fairness, and strength. He believed unity made everyone safer. Watching a child suffer for an accident felt wrong. The announcer lifted his hand. He counted from 10. The guards raised their whips. The electric glow brightened. When the announcer reached 3, Mira tried to step back, but the guards forced her still. Her voice cracked in fear. The noble nodded with satisfaction. The announcer reached 1. The first whip lifted high. Mark felt his heart jump. Without thinking, he ran forward. The sound of his boots echoed across the courtyard. The noble looked shocked. The crowd gasped. The announcer yelled to stop, but the whip was already swinging down. Mark reached out and grabbed the whip handle before it struck Mira's back. The electric charge stung his hand. He pulled the weapon back and stepped in front of Mira. Guards pointed their weapons at him. Dan shouted for him to step back. The noble demanded to know what he was doing. Mark stood tall and said he would take the punishment instead. His voice was strong and clear. He said Mira was a child. He said she did not mean harm. He said 300 lashes would break her. The noble narrowed his eyes and asked why a human would suffer for an alien girl. Mark answered simply. He said wrong punishment teaches fear, not respect. The noble stared at him. Silence spread across the courtyard. Some aliens whispered. They had never heard of a human offering to suffer in place of another species. It was rare, almost impossible. The announcer asked again if Mark was sure. He warned 300 lashes could cost him his life. Mark nodded. He said he was sure. Mira stared at Mark with wide eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice shook too much. She whispered, "Thank you." Mark turned slightly and gave her a small, calm smile. Varos, the noble, finally waved his hand. He agreed. He said he wanted to see if humans were truly as strong as stories claimed. He said he would accept this exchange. The crowd murmured in surprise. Guards untied Mira and gently moved her away. She stood beside the patrol, still shaking, but now free. A medic nearby moved closer to help her. She kept watching Mark with guilt and fear. 2 guards tied Mark's hands to a metal post. They removed his armor from his back, leaving plain cloth. The noble stepped back to watch. The announcer raised his hand again. The crowd leaned forward. The guard with the whip lifted his arm. Mark breathed slowly. He told himself to stand strong. He wanted the crowd to see humans were not cruel. He wanted Mira to feel safe. The whip slapped across his back with a bright crack. A shock rushed through his body. His knees bent slightly, but he did not fall. A second crack came. Then a third. The crowd watched with wide eyes. Some whispered that no one could survive 300. Others said humans had strange strength. Children hid behind parents. Mira covered her mouth as tears fell again. She blamed herself. After 20 lashes, Mark's shirt tore. After 40, his back was covered with glowing red lines. His breathing grew heavy. Dan begged him to stop, but Mark refused. He said he would continue. He said he gave his word. The announcer continued to count. Each number echoed around the courtyard. Alien citizens felt something change inside them. They saw courage, not violence, in this human. They saw sacrifice, not selfishness. When the whip landed the 50th time, the guard paused. Mark's head hung low, but he raised it again. He kept standing. His stance was firm. A wave of respect moved through the crowd. Mira stepped closer, asking the announcer to stop. She said she would repay the noble with her labor. Varos refused. He said the punishment must be seen. The noble wanted to show power, but now the power did not feel like his anymore. The people watched Mark instead of him. By lash 70, even some guards looked uncomfortable. Dan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to push forward. But Mark's eyes told him not to move. He wanted to finish what he started. Mark's breath grew slow. He felt pain everywhere. Still he stood. Each lash felt like fire along his back, but he refused to fall. In his mind, he saw Mira's fear. He saw a world where kindness had meaning. He would not fail that idea. When the count reached 100, the announcer lowered his hand to give Mark a break. The crowd cheered softly, not loud but with respect. Some aliens wiped tears. Mira ran to a medic who quickly treated Mark's skin with cooling spray while he remained tied. Varos watched all of this quietly. He did not smile anymore. He saw eyes filled with respect for the human. He feared this change. He feared aliens would follow humans if they became symbols of honor. But the punishment had to continue. He ordered the announcer to resume. Mark lifted his head. He nodded. The announcer raised his hand again. The guard lifted the whip. The crowd silenced. Mark whispered to himself that he could endure. He told himself to stand for every small voice in the galaxy who could not stand alone. He breathed slowly and prepared for the next strike. The courtyard waited. The air felt heavy. No one moved, and the punishment continued. The courtyard was silent. Every person stared at Mark tied to the metal post. His back was red with long lines from the electro whip. Sweat rolled down his face. His breath was slow and heavy, but his eyes stayed open. The guard waited for the announcer. The noble Varos crossed his arms and watched without emotion. Mira stood behind the soldiers, holding her hands to her chest. She looked weak from fear. The announcer called out again. The guard lifted the whip. The bright glow returned. The sound of the whip moved through the air like a sharp wind. It struck Mark's back again. The crowd flinched at the sound. Mark's body shook, but he did not fall. He straightened his legs and looked forward. Whip number 101 fell, then 102. The count grew. Each time the whip landed, Mark's muscles tightened. His breath came out in sharp bursts. The cloth on his back tore more and skin showed through the cuts. The electric charge left sparks dancing on his skin for a moment, then faded into burning pain. Mira bit her lip and stepped forward. One of the guards blocked her gently. He told her to stay behind for safety. She wiped tears and begged softly for them to stop. But her voice was too quiet for the noble to hear. Dan put a hand on her shoulder and told her to be strong. He said Mark had chosen this path. She nodded, but her eyes never left Mark. The count reached 120. The guard rested again. The announcer gave a short break so Mark would not collapse too fast. Alien citizens whispered among themselves. Many were confused. Some asked why a human would risk his life for a girl he did not know. Old merchants nodded with respect. A winged alien child asked his father why no one had ever done something like this before. The father did not have an answer. During the break, a station medic checked Mark's back. He applied a cold spray that calmed the burning feeling. Mark stood straight and thanked the medic. His voice was tired but still steady. Mira wanted to walk to him and apologize, but fear held her feet still. She felt small and helpless. Barrows turned to one of his advisors. He asked if humans always acted like this. The advisor replied that humans were unpredictable. Some were rough. Some were kind. Humans had many sides. Varos narrowed his eyes, thinking quietly. The announcer lifted his hand again. The guard took position. The whip flowed through the air again. The sound echoed between the tall walls of the courtyard. 125, 130, 135. Mark clenched his teeth and remained standing. His back pulsed with pain. His vision blurred for moments, but he forced his eyes to stay open. Dan watched with worry. He whispered to the other soldiers that Mark was stronger than most humans he had ever seen. Another soldier replied that Mark once survived a desert patrol without water for 2 days. They said he never gave up. When the count reached 150, the announcer paused again. Mark leaned his head forward and let out a slow breath. The medic sprayed more cooling gel. His hands trembled a little, but he still looked steady. Mira walked closer, asking quietly if he was all right. Mark turned slightly and said he was still here. His voice was rough, but his eyes were sharp. Mira nodded, feeling respect grow in her heart like a warm flame. The crowd grew restless. Some argued that this punishment had gone too far. Others said the law must be respected. But many alien citizens looked at Mark with admiration. They began to feel that maybe kindness and bravery were stronger than fear. Before this day, they believed humans were distant and cold. Today, they saw something new. Barrows spoke loudly. He said the punishment must continue. He reminded everyone that noble law could not be changed by a single act. He wanted to show strength, but his voice sounded less confident now. He felt the eyes of the crowd shift from him to Mark. He did not like that feeling. The announcer began again. The whip landed 160, 170, 180. Mark's knees shook once, but he locked them straight again. The guard was sweating from swinging so many times. Mark's breath grew slower, deeper. His vision darkened at the edges. At 185, Mark's head dropped for a moment. Mira gasped softly. Dan stepped forward, but Mark lifted one hand slightly, showing he was still in control. Dan stopped and nodded with respect. Each lash now felt like fire mixed with electricity. The pain shot through Mark's shoulders and down his spine. His clothing clung to his skin mixed with sweat. Still, he would not surrender. He thought about every person who ever feared a punishment they did not deserve. He thought about every young voice that was ignored. His feet felt heavy, but he stayed tall. At 200, the announcer finally took a long break. The courtyard filled with cheers for the first time. Aliens clapped. They shouted that Mark was brave. Children waved flags. Some older aliens said they felt hope for the first time in years. Varos's face darkened, annoyed by their excitement. The medic hurried forward again, working fast. He looked worried now. He warned Mark that continuing could harm his body permanently. Mark listened quietly. He felt pain in his bones, sharp like metal pushing against him. But he said he would finish. The medic sighed and stepped back. Mira walked to Mark again. She placed her hand gently on his wrist. She told him she would never forget this. She said she would repay him someday. Tears shined in her eyes. Mark smiled a little and told her to save her strength. He said the galaxy needed calm hearts, not broken ones. Varos stepped closer, his voice cold. He asked Mark if this was worth it. He said no one would remember this in a year. Mark replied that even if the galaxy forgot, he would remember that he did not stand still while someone suffered. His words reached the crowd. They fell silent for a moment, thinking deeply. The announcer continued. 205, 210, then 220. Mark's breath grew shallow. He closed his eyes for a moment. He swayed but pushed both feet firm against the ground. The crowd chanted his name now. They shouted, cheering for him to stand. Varos looked uncomfortable. His advisor whispered that the people were changing. They were learning that kindness was stronger than fear. Varos clenched his fists and ordered the announcer to continue faster. He said the punishment must end soon. The guard swung again. 230, 240, 250. At each number, Mark grunted softly. His vision blurred more. He tasted metal on his tongue. His body trembled. He could feel his heartbeat in every cut, but he held on. Mira begged again for them to stop. She said she would work for Varos without rest if he spared Mark. Varos refused. He said law cannot be bought with labor. But his voice was shaky now, like he was unsure. At 260, the guard reported that his arm was tired. He asked if another guard could take his place. Varos agreed. A new guard stepped forward, holding the whip firmly. Mark closed his eyes and prepared. His shoulders lifted slowly. He whispered that he would finish. 270, 280, 290. Mark swayed again, falling to one knee. Mira cried out. The crowd begged him to stop. But Mark pushed his legs straight and stood again. The announcer's voice shook as he whispered 295. One more swing came. Mark gasped but stayed standing. The final lash fell. 300. A strange silence covered the courtyard. No one spoke. Everyone stared. Dan clapped softly. Then the crowd exploded into loud cheers. Mark's legs gave out. He fell forward, but two soldiers caught him and lowered him gently to the ground. Mira rushed to his side. Her hands hovered over his back, afraid to touch the wounds. Tears rolled down her face silently. The medic worked fast. He gave Mark water and sprayed more medicine. Mark's eyes were half closed. He whispered that it was done. He said Mira was safe. Mira nodded again and again, weeping with relief. Varos looked around and saw eyes full of respect for the human. He saw that fear of noble punishment had faded. People were inspired. He felt his control slip. He turned and walked away silently. His advisors followed him quickly. The announcer declared the punishment complete. He said everyone could return to their homes. But many citizens stayed. They wanted to see Mark recover. They wanted to show thanks. They brought water, blankets, and small gifts. Soldiers lifted Mark onto a hover stretcher. Mira walked beside him. She held his hand gently. She whispered that she would never forget. Dan smiled at her and said Mark was stubborn and strong. As the stretcher moved through the crowd, aliens bowed their heads in respect. They touched their hearts. They whispered blessings. Mark heard some of the voices in a soft dream. His eyes closed slowly. Mira whispered again that she would repay him someday. A promise formed in her heart. The doors to the medical hall opened. The soldiers carried Mark inside. The lights dimmed behind them. Outside, the crowd remained, talking about what they had seen. Hope floated in the air like soft dust. Brave actions could change hearts, and today a human had changed many. The medical hall was quiet, with soft blue lights glowing from the ceiling. Machines hummed gently as they watched Mark's heartbeat and breathing. His body rested on a clean white bed, and bandages wrapped across his back and arms. Cool medicine covered the wounds, helping the skin heal slowly. His face looked pale but peaceful. Mira sat on a chair beside his bed. She had not left since he was brought inside. Her eyes watched every breath he took. Her hands rested on her knees, shaking lightly. She felt guilty but also grateful. She whispered small thanks when he moved, even a little. Dan stood near the doorway, speaking with the station doctor. The doctor said Mark needed days of rest and his back must be treated carefully. The doctor explained that 300 lashes were dangerous for any body. Dan nodded and looked toward Mark. He felt proud and worried at the same time. Outside the medical hall, aliens gathered. They talked about what they saw. They spoke softly but excitedly. Some said they had never seen such courage. Others said this was the first time they felt respect for humans. Many hearts changed in only one afternoon. Inside the hall, Mark woke slowly. He felt pain across his back like burning lines, but the medicine eased it a little. He opened his eyes and blinked. Mira gasped softly and leaned forward. She asked if he could see her. Mark nodded gently. His voice was weak but calm. He asked if she was safe. Mira said she was safe, and she thanked him again. She tried not to cry, but tears formed anyway. Mark smiled slightly, saying she did not need to thank him. Dan walked to the bed and crossed his arms. He told Mark that his choice was brave but also risky. He reminded him that next time he should call for help. Mark nodded. He agreed, but said some moments needed action, not waiting. The doctor returned with more medicine. He asked Mira to step aside while he applied new bandages. Mira walked to the window and looked outside. The courtyard was empty now, but she remembered the crowd, the sound of the whip, and the strength she saw. She felt changed inside. When the doctor finished, he said Mark should rest for at least 2 weeks. Mira promised to help take care of him. Dan said the patrol would guard the medical hall to avoid any trouble from Varos or his guards. Later that night, the station lights dimmed. The halls grew quiet. Only the medical machines made sounds. Mira rested in her chair, but she did not sleep. She watched Mark carefully. At one moment, she whispered a story about her home, a small village far from the station. She said she worked in markets to send money home. Mark listened silently, finding comfort in her voice. Days passed slowly. Mark's wounds healed little by little. The doctor was impressed at how strong his body was. He said humans had unusual recovery speed. Mira stayed every day bringing food and water. She cleaned his room and read small stories aloud to him. Mark listened and asked questions. They talked about simple things like favorite foods, quiet night walks, and friendly animals. Outside the room, soldiers guarded the doorway. They saluted anyone who entered. Many alien citizens visited to show respect. They brought fruit, blankets, and letters. Some thanked Mark with quiet voices. Others could not speak and simply bowed. Mark nodded slowly each time, smiling gently. Word spread across the station. Traders in the market told the story. Pilots shared it with passing travelers. Merchants told it to children at night. Everyone described how a human saved a young girl and stood against fear. The story became larger, and rumors spread that Mark could not be beaten. People spoke his name like a symbol. Varos stayed silent during these days. He sat in his private hall thinking. His advisor warned him that the crowd's admiration was growing. If he punished another child so harshly, they might turn against him. Varos felt frustrated. He blamed humans for this change. He said their ideas about kindness were making aliens weak. His advisor said it was not weakness, but unity. Varos did not accept that. Meanwhile, Mira's family arrived on the station. Her mother and father rushed into the medical hall and hugged her tightly. They thanked Mark with deep respect. They placed their hands on their hearts and bowed low. They said their family would always remember his act. Mark tried to sit up, thanking them quietly, but the doctor pushed him back down. He told him to stay still. Mira's family brought a small gift, a crystal charm shaped like a star. They placed it beside his bed. They said the crystal brought safety. Mark smiled again and thanked them. On the 8th day, Mark was able to stand slowly. He walked short steps around the room, leaning on Mira's arm. Each step was painful, but he did not complain. Mira encouraged him with a soft voice. Dan monitored his progress and smiled when he walked faster. One morning, the station commander requested to meet Mark in the courtyard. The skylights glowed bright above them. Citizens gathered again, but this time with cheering voices. The commander explained that Mark's actions reminded the station of fairness. He said rules would be reviewed. Noble punishments would be questioned. He said fear should not control hearts. The crowd cheered loudly. Mira smiled with pride. Mark bowed his head slightly and thanked the commander. Varos watched from a distance, his face cold. He spoke to his advisor quietly. He said he would not forget this insult. Something dark grew behind his eyes. After the meeting, alien merchants invited Mark to their shop. They offered free fruit and warm drinks. Children asked to touch the crystal charm he now wore around his neck. Mark laughed softly and told them stories about his home planet. Mira watched happily from behind. At night, Mira walked Mark back to the medical hall. They talked about courage. Mira said she wanted to become helpful to others. She said she wanted to learn healing so she could protect people. Mark nodded and said she would be a great healer. Mira smiled and promised to train hard. The next day, a group of alien council members visited Mark. They thanked him and offered to pay him, but he refused money. He said he did not act for reward. The council respected him more for that. They promised to change the law so no child would suffer so harshly again. Outside the medical hall, groups of aliens began helping each other. They offered food, repaired broken market tiles, cleaned corners, and greeted humans kindly. All of this changed because one person stood against unfair pain. However, not everyone supported this change. A small group loyal to Varos grumbled. They said nobles would lose power. They wanted to frighten citizens back into silence. They whispered plans in dark corners. They watched Mark with angry eyes. One night, Dan found strange messages on the station wall. They said humans were interfering. They said nobles would take action soon. Dan reported this to the commander. The commander ordered guards to watch every entrance. Inside the hall, Mark slept quietly. Mira placed a blanket over him. She felt nervous but safe near him. She trusted he could protect her, even wounded. She held the star crystal and whispered a small promise. She said she would stand beside him if danger returned. Varos met with other nobles in secret. They spoke in low voices. Varos said Mark must be removed from the station. He said citizens were learning to question authority. He said this could lead to rebellion. The nobles argued back and forth. Some feared the crowd's respect for Mark was too strong. Varos growled and slammed his fist. He said they must act before kindness grew stronger. One noble suggested testing humans again. Another said they should spread lies. Varos listened and planned quietly. His face showed anger, but his voice was calm. He said they would wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, Mark's strength continued to return. Each day he walked farther. The doctor smiled and said humans were impressive healers. Mira held his arm and guided him through the halls. People cheered when they saw him. They called his name with pride. Mark felt shy from the attention. He said he was only one person. Mira said one person was enough to change many hearts. He looked at her and realized she was right. On the 12th day, Mark joined his patrol again. Soldiers saluted him. They said it was good to have him back. Mira waved from the medical hall doorway. Mark waved back and promised to visit soon. The patrol walked through markets. Citizens bowed, smiled, and offered small gifts. Mark accepted them politely. He reminded children to stay kind and curious. He greeted elders with respect. He felt the station had changed since the day of the punishment. The air felt lighter. That night, Mark and Dan sat outside under a glass dome that looked out to the stars. Dan said he never imagined one act could make such a difference. Mark replied that pain can build walls, but sacrifice opens doors. Dan nodded, deeply moved. Unknown to them, Varos watched from the shadows. His eyes narrowed when he saw the respect Mark received. He clenched his teeth. He whispered to himself that this new kindness would end soon. Then he walked away, disappearing into the dark hall. Mark felt a sudden chill in the air but did not know why. He looked up at the stars and wondered what small acts would come next. He hoped the station would continue this new path of unity. Mira watched from a distance, holding the star crystal close to her heart. A calm night passed, but change had only begun. The space station's corridors were busy again. Traders moved quickly, hovering carts loaded with goods, and travelers hurried to their docking bays. But beneath the busy life, whispers of unrest traveled through the halls. Varos had not forgotten Mark's actions. His anger had not faded. He met with secret allies, planning to show that fear still had power. The nobles whispered about punishment, control, and proving authority. They did not realize that kindness and courage were already spreading through the citizens' hearts. Meanwhile, Mira continued to grow stronger. She practiced healing with the station's medics, learning quickly. Her small hands moved carefully over plants and medicine, applying ointments to wounds. She studied the machines, asking questions about how they worked. Mark watched from nearby, sitting with Dan in a quiet corner. He smiled when Mira repeated instructions perfectly, treating a small injured alien pet brought in by a merchant. Mark's back had healed more than expected. The red lines faded, leaving pale marks, but the memory of pain stayed. Each movement reminded him of what he had endured. Still, he stood tall, moving carefully through the station, helping others when he could. Soldiers followed him, respecting him not because of orders, but because they saw the example he had set. He no longer felt alone. One morning, a young alien boy ran to the patrol headquarters. He said some nobles were planning to challenge humans. He said Varos wanted to prove that one human could not change the station. Mark listened carefully. He nodded and said they must be cautious but ready. He called Dan and a few trusted soldiers. Together they began planning quietly. They could not let fear return, but they also could not act recklessly. Mira overheard part of the conversation. She asked to help. Mark smiled and agreed. Her quick mind and knowledge of station pathways could be useful. She felt proud and nervous. She had never imagined that she would be part of protecting the station after one act of kindness. Varos watched the station from his private balcony. He had ordered guards to watch Mark closely. He wanted to strike at the right moment. He whispered to his advisors that humans would not dominate his city. He said he would prove that courage was not enough. The nobles agreed to wait, watching the crowds and citizens for weakness. One afternoon, Mark and Mira walked through the market. Citizens recognized them immediately. Merchants waved. Children ran to them, shouting their names. Many adults bowed in respect. Mira smiled and waved. Mark shook hands politely. They passed a group of older aliens who whispered to each other. They said the station had changed because of one human and one small girl. Mira laughed softly, embarrassed but happy. Suddenly, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A small group of Varos's allies had blocked the entrance to the docking bay. They demanded that no humans could pass. A shipment carrying medicines and supplies was delayed. Citizens whispered anxiously. Mark motioned for calm. He told Mira to stay nearby and called a small team of soldiers to investigate. The group reached the blocked dock. Varos's men stood firmly. Their faces were proud and cruel. They said humans could not move freely. Mark stepped forward, raising his hand. His voice was calm but firm. He told them that the station was not ruled by fear. He said kindness and law allowed everyone to pass freely. The men laughed, mocking him, but they did not move. Mark nodded to his team. They stood ready, weapons in hand but not raised. Mira watched closely. She noticed one guard was nervous. His eyes flicked between Mark and the crowd. Mark whispered to her that sometimes fear could be turned into respect without violence. She nodded, understanding. They waited and the crowd began to gather. Citizens stood behind Mark, curious, quiet, but strong. Their presence made the guards uneasy. The tension grew. Then slowly, a small alien merchant stepped forward. He told Varos's men that they were wrong. The station belonged to everyone, not only nobles. More citizens joined. They spoke together. Their voices rose as one. Mark stayed calm in the center, letting their courage show through. The blocked guards looked around. They realized they were outnumbered not by violence but by unity. Finally, one guard dropped his whip and stepped aside. The others followed. Mark allowed them to leave without anger. Mira clapped softly. Citizens cheered quietly. No one had been hurt. Yet the station had witnessed another proof of courage and respect. Mark smiled. He said that the strongest forces always honor and fairness, not fear. That evening, Mark returned to the medical hall. Mira helped him rest. She cleaned his boots and brought water. He thanked her quietly. The night was calm. The stars shone through the glass dome above. Mark looked at the station and said that the fight for fairness was never over. But each day, courage could grow. Mira nodded, her eyes shining with determination. Meanwhile, Varos did not sleep. His anger grew. He walked in circles across his private hall. He whispered to himself that humans could not hold power over aliens for long. His advisors tried to calm him, saying that Mark had not done anything wrong by law. Varos shook his head. He said law was nothing without control. He promised himself that a stronger action would come. The next morning, news arrived from a nearby planet. Traders reported that other human patrols were talking about Mark. They praised his bravery. They said one human could teach respect to an entire station. Mira listened to the stories. She smiled softly. She said one act of courage could inspire many. Mark agreed. They both understood that kindness had power beyond immediate actions. It traveled quickly through the galaxy. As days passed, the station continued to change. Citizens worked together more. Merchants offered free help to travelers. Children helped carry goods. Humans and aliens walked together without fear. Patrols patrolled less strictly and respect grew naturally. Mira learned quickly, observing each interaction, taking notes in her small notebook. She wanted to help in the future, inspired by Mark's strength. One day, a message arrived for Mark from the station commander. He asked him to attend a council meeting. The council wanted to discuss changes in noble law and citizen safety. Mark agreed. He told Mira and Dan to stay behind but remain alert. Mira nodded and held his arm gently. She felt proud and nervous at the same time. The station had already seen courage, and now it would see wisdom in action. The council hall was filled with high-ranking aliens. Varos was present, sitting in the far corner. His face was cold and full of warning. Citizens watched quietly from observation windows. Mark stepped forward calmly. He bowed slightly, respecting the council, and began to speak. He told them that punishment should not create fear, but teach lessons. He explained that unity and fairness made a station strong, not cruelty. Mira listened proudly, seeing how Mark spoke clearly without anger but with courage. Varos interrupted him, questioning why a human would lecture aliens. He said humans were outsiders. Mark looked at him steadily. He said outsiders could see truth more clearly sometimes, because they are not bound by old fears. The crowd watched silently. Mira noticed murmurs of agreement from other council members. Some even nodded slowly. By the end of the meeting, the council agreed to revise some laws. They promised that young aliens would no longer face harsh punishments for accidents. Citizens cheered quietly in observation rooms. Mark stepped back, nodding to Mira and Dan. Mira felt happy, knowing their combined courage had changed not just one girl's life, but the law for many. But Varos did not give up. He left the council quietly, planning again. His anger simmered. He would wait for the right moment to act. Mark and Mira did not know when or how, but they sensed it in the air. They prepared quietly, training, observing, and helping citizens. Their courage was ready for what might come next. At night, Mark and Mira walked together along the observation deck. Stars sparkled in the distance. Mira whispered that she wanted to learn everything about healing and protecting others. Mark smiled and told her that courage was the first step. Knowledge came next. They watched the station lights twinkle below, feeling the quiet pride of their achievements. Yet both understood that shadows lingered. They would face them when the time came. As the station slept, Varos's plan quietly moved forward. He gathered secret allies and instructed spies to watch Mark closely. He knew that the next challenge would test not only courage but wisdom, strategy, and loyalty. He whispered that the station would remember his power soon. Yet little did he know the citizens had begun to trust and admire humans, and this change was already unstoppable. Mira held the star crystal close to her heart that night. She promised herself she would stand brave like Mark. Mark looked at her and said that sometimes the smallest person can make the largest difference. She nodded, feeling warmth and pride. Together they were ready for whatever came next. The space station's future was beginning to shift. Courage had inspired change. Fear was losing its grip. And a human and an alien girl had shown the galaxy that even in darkness light could grow. The morning sun glowed softly over the space station. Its light reflected across the tall towers and wide platforms. Citizens moved quietly, but a sense of hope filled the air. After weeks of fear and tension, the station had begun to breathe differently. People walked with pride, not worry. Children laughed more freely. Merchants exchanged goods with honesty. A quiet respect for each other grew naturally. And at the center of this change stood Mark and Mira, whose courage and actions had inspired everyone. Mark had recovered fully. His back bore pale marks from the punishment, a reminder of the trial he had faced. Yet he carried himself with calm strength. He walked through the station with purpose, speaking to citizens, helping travelers, and guiding patrols. His presence alone reassured many that fairness and courage could prevail over cruelty. Mira had grown too. Her training in healing and care progressed rapidly. Her small hands worked carefully, learning to treat injuries, illnesses, and the stresses of life on a busy station. Her eyes sparkled with determination. She remembered the day of her punishment and the bravery that had saved her life. Each step she took was filled with respect for the life she had been given. Varos, meanwhile, had not given up. He remained in his private chambers, plotting quietly. He believed the admiration for humans was temporary. He believed citizens would soon return to fear if he acted decisively. His advisors advised patience. They suggested small tests, careful moves, and observing weaknesses. Varos agreed silently. His anger was a shadow that stretched through the station. Even his light of courage grew stronger. One afternoon, news reached the station that a small rebel faction was attempting to challenge the market's peace. They threatened merchants and travelers. Mark and his patrol prepared immediately. Mira joined, carrying medical supplies and equipment. Together, they walked through the crowded platforms, watching for danger. Citizens saw them and felt safe, knowing those who had acted with courage before now led their protection. At the central market, the rebels were gathered, trying to intimidate traders. Their weapons were crude, but they believed fear would control the station. The crowd watched nervously. Mark stepped forward calmly. He spoke with authority, explaining that violence would not succeed. He said that the citizens' unity was stronger than fear, and that everyone had the right to live safely. His voice was calm but firm, echoing across the open platforms. The rebels laughed at first, underestimating him, but Mira moved among the crowd quietly, guiding citizens out of harm's way and distributing supplies to those in need. The patience and care shown by humans and allied aliens surprised the rebels. They realized that the station's citizens were prepared to stand together. The group began to falter, unsure how to continue. Mark gave them one final chance to leave. His words were sharp but fair. "Leave now and no harm will come to you. Stay, and you face the will of the people you thought you could scare." His stance was steady. Mira watched closely, ready to provide help to any injured. The rebels looked at the crowd and saw eyes filled with courage. They hesitated and finally stepped back. Slowly, they turned and left, disappearing into the station's corridors. The crowd erupted with quiet cheers. Citizens thanked Mark and Mira. Children ran to them, waving hands and laughing. Traders bowed in respect. Older citizens whispered blessings. Mark smiled gently. Mira held the star crystal she carried since her first rescue and felt warmth in her heart. This was the power of courage, she realized. Even small acts, when shared, could create strength across many. Barros, watching from afar, clenched his fists. His anger boiled, but he understood that the station's unity was strong. His allies were cautious now. Fear alone could no longer rule. He retreated silently, planning, but realizing that change had already begun. He knew the citizens had seen courage that could not be erased easily. The council of the station met later that day. Mark was invited as a guest of honor. Mira accompanied him. Together they explained how courage, fairness, and care could prevent future conflicts. The council listened carefully. They promised that harsh punishments for accidents would no longer exist. Citizens would have rights protected by law. Mistakes could be corrected without fear. Mark's words inspired every listener. Mira's presence reminded them of the lives affected by courage. After the council meeting, the station's markets, platforms, and living areas felt lighter. Citizens smiled more. Patrols were respected for fairness, not feared for force. Traders welcomed travelers openly. Children played freely in spaces that once felt dangerous. Parents thanked humans and allied aliens alike. The station was alive with hope. It had learned that unity was stronger than fear, kindness stronger than cruelty. Mira began teaching younger aliens about healing. She showed them how to care for each other, how to notice when someone was hurt, and how small acts of help could create lasting change. Mark supervised nearby, teaching patience, bravery, and fairness. Citizens from different worlds came to watch and learn. Together, they created a network of respect that grew day by day. One evening, Mark and Mira walked to the observation deck. The stars stretched across the sky in endless patterns. Mira held the star crystal in her hand and whispered that she would never forget the lessons of courage. Mark told her that each person had the power to inspire change. Even small actions could ripple through the galaxy. They watched the lights of the station below, seeing citizens moving peacefully, helping each other and living with trust. Barros watched them from the shadows. He understood that he could not stop the station's new path easily. But he did not give up. He would continue planning, waiting for opportunities. Yet he also knew that Mark's courage had changed the hearts of many. Even his power could not reverse the trust and respect that now connected humans and aliens. Change had a life of its own. Weeks passed. Mira's healing skills improved rapidly. She treated minor injuries and taught patience to those around her. Mark's presence continued to inspire citizens. He led patrols with fairness, listened to complaints, and solved problems carefully. Together, he and Mira became symbols of courage and compassion. Young aliens told stories of how the human had taken the punishment for Mira. Humans told stories of the alien girl who had learned to help others. Their story spread beyond the station, reaching traders and travelers across the galaxy. One morning, A new challenge arrived. A small alien clan previously loyal to Veros questioned the new laws. They threatened to refuse cooperation with traders and patrols. Citizens grew nervous. Mark and Mira prepared. Mark gathered his team. Mira brought medical supplies and helpers. They moved carefully, listening to the clan's concerns. Instead of force, Mark spoke first. He reminded them of the punishment that had united many. He explained that cooperation created strength, not fear. Mira spoke gently about caring for each other and protecting lives. Slowly, the clan realized they had nothing to gain by conflict. They agreed to follow the new guidance. Citizens quietly cheered. Courage and patience had won again. Varos heard of this event. His anger was sharp, but he noticed something new. His threats no longer had the same power. The citizens listened to those who acted with fairness and courage. Even some of his loyal followers began to respect humans. He understood that fear alone could not hold a station together anymore. Yet he remained cautious, waiting for an opening, but knowing it would be harder to find. Mark and Mira continued their daily work. Patrols, healing, and teaching became routines, but they never grew tired. They understood that every day offered a chance to shape the station. Citizens watched, inspired. Children dreamed of bravery and kindness. Adults began to speak respectfully, listening to each other. Traders and travelers shared stories of courage. The station had changed forever. One evening, the commander asked Mark to address the entire station from the main platform. Citizens gathered, curious and hopeful. Mark spoke calmly, explaining the importance of fairness, respect, and courage. He told them that fear may exist, but bravery and care could overcome it. Mira stood beside him, holding the star crystal. She added that every person could help, no matter how small. The crowd listened, quiet at first, then with growing cheers. Their voices carried through every hall, every corridor, every market. The station had learned its lesson. Varos watched silently. He realized that the future had shifted. Humans and aliens were no longer divided by fear. Courage and kindness had taken root. He knew he could not return the station to old ways easily. Even he felt the power of unity in the crowd's energy. Mark had not only saved Mira, he had saved the hearts of the citizens, inspired respect, and created lasting change. Months later, the station flourished. Markets were full, citizens were happy, and peace reigned. Children learned courage from stories of Mark and Mira. Adults taught kindness in every trade, every hallway, every meeting. Mira became a skilled healer. Mark became a symbol of unity, fairness, and courage. The citizens of the station never forgot the day a human had stepped forward to protect an alien child, risking everything. The story became a lesson for generations.